Hello guys, this is gonna be my patch 10.4 competitive meta review. I know I released a 10.3 video only yesterday and that patch 10.4 was already on the internet, but I still wanted to make a longer video on 10.3, also because I've talked about more than just the patch notes, also about champion viability and what I think is the state of different lanes in the current meta and what their strong points are, what their weak points are. Well, I hope I'm gonna make it a short one and just a small video on the new patch and see what has changed and what implications that might have in competitive, or at least in a higher level of play and in a team play level. Amumu got a buff, his Q dash speed is increased and his R cooldown is decreased and now stops dashes. Together with that, we also have a Bami Cinder massive buff, but I'll talk about that one later. But this Amumu buff increased with the Bami Cinder buff, what makes me think that maybe it's time to pick up Amumu in the jungle. Don't think that he's going to be completely viable because, of course, Amumu still has quite a slow clear. He doesn't really have the ability to contest any early objectives, whether that be Skull Crabs or Drakes or early ganks. He can gank early, of course, with his Q, and his ganks will be more effective, especially after he reaches level 6, and he'll be able to gank a lot more. But still, if you compare him to Olaf, Lee Sin, Jarvan, Elise, Gragas, still think that he's gonna underperform if you compare him with the top tier junglers from the previous patch and from the competitive scene. He might be nice to pick up if you have a wombo combo in your team, if you have a Leona that can layer the CC with him, if you have a Ziggs with a lot of AoE damage, or maybe some people are gonna pick up Katarina. I do think that Katarina is also a very nice niche pick in the mid lane that can perform really well if she has the team around it that can give her the setup that she needs. And Amumu might be the champion that can give her the setup to be more viable and played a lot more. And next up is Aphelios. I'm happy with the first change, the Weapons of the Faithful. Players can now see both guns Aphelios is holding. This is nice for both your own team and the enemy team. It's nice for your own team because if they know what his guns do, they can anticipate which guns Aphelios has and which combos he's ready to perform, and then they can make plays according to the weapons that Aphelios has. So the AD carry doesn't necessarily need to be the primary shot caller in fights anymore, because he knows what kind of weapons he can utilize in the fight and he knows what their strengths and what their weaknesses are. This gives him, or gives his team, more options to decide what kind of things they want to do and what kind of fights they want to take. On the other hand, it's also a buff and a nice thing for the enemy team, because now the enemy team can also make up their mind on whether they want to fight or not, or whether they want to heavy engage or Aphelios, or that they know that they're gonna get one shot from a few screens away. But I don't think that this new weapon view and the removal of his attack timer, the slight change on the Chakram gun, and the decrease of the range of his ultimate, I don't think that this is gonna completely gut Aphelios and make him not the top tier AD carry that you can pick up anymore. Of course, people are gonna still have to get used to all of his weapons, everything that all of his weapons do, and the combos that he has with them, and the combos that those abilities give him. Even though they can see what it does, I still think it's gonna take them a lot of time to recognize it and to know what to do when he has a certain set of guns. So the nerfs that he's gotten it decreases the value of his kit and the viability of the champion slightly. But if you want to compare it to how viable any of the other AD carries are, and especially if you're not looking at Varus as being played slightly, or Misfortune or Senna, then Aphelios is still going to be one of the best AD carries to pick up. The only thing is with the Cinderhulk change that maybe tanks are gonna make a comeback, and then there's a possibility that there's gonna be more AD carries. But I will get back to that after I've talked about the Cinderhulk change. Aurelion Sol, his damage got nerfed. Don't know why. There's not a lot of people that play Aurelion Sol. I really like playing him. I know that the mid laner of Timeout, Dragflake, also loves playing Aurelion Sol. Of course, Huni, either of those also loves playing Aurelion Sol. But whenever either of those players is mid lane and on the team, the enemy team always just respect bans this because somehow they managed to make it work. But I do think this is gutting him even more. It was already only one Trix that played in, and I know of course that Quantum Physics doesn't like the new ASOL at all, and then his W and his passive damage got nerfed in this patch, of course, in one of the previous patches. So I think it's just sad to see the Star Gentle creator weaker, even weaker than he is already, because there's just so much you can do to counterplay him, and there's so much champions that hard counter him. I don't see any way that he's gonna be extremely viable in high levels or any level of competitive play. Caitlyn, they increased their bonus attack speed at level 1. This is nice. She can harass you more in the early game, especially at level 1. So if you're a Caitlyn and you're versus a Senna, a Senna Leona or a Aphelios Leona, like a heavy level 3, level 2 engage line, you can poke them out at level 1. That can dissuade them from engaging on you on level 3 or slightly later in the game. So it's good for Caitlyn players, it's good for your early game harass, but I don't think that it's gonna make Caitlyn as viable in the mid to late game because her kit just isn't as good as the kit that Senna and Aphelios have. Maybe it's nice to have a Caitlyn if you're versus if Senna and Aphelios both have been banned and you're versus a Miss Fortune, because of course Miss Fortune can also bully someone out of lane and Caitlyn can do the same, and the whole thing of Miss Fortune is that she has a lot of range with her ultimate and with the Q that can bounce off minions. Caitlyn can match that pretty well, I think, so it does make her a lot more viable, and I do think that maybe she's gonna be seen playing again. Only downside is that it takes a lot of time to skill up with crit items, whereas of course Senna and Aphelios also skill, but they're just better champions with the items that they build versus so I'd rather have a 3 item Aphelios or a 3 item Senna than a Caitlyn with the same amount of items and farm and kills and everything. In Garen, they upped the attack damage ratio on his Q, and his shield got increased, and there's more scaling on his shield. I don't think I've seen any Garen being picked up. I know from solo queue that he's annoying to play against, and that if a Garen gets fed, that he's really hard to deal with because then his abilities just seem completely overpowered. But especially in competitive play or in teams where people communicate with each other, if they pick some form of CC or kiting or they know what they're doing, then Garen should never be able to get onto your backline and be able to do his full combo and just do a million damage with his ultimate. So it's nice for Garen players, but it doesn't make him any more viable. Same pretty much goes for Gnar. His base movement speed got increased, but the bonus movement speed on his passive got decreased, and his ultimate has a better attack damage ratio. Of course, the thing with Gnar is that in order to completely utilize your ultimate, you need to get on close and you need to be able to jump over or to the backline of the enemies or get a really nice flank off. If you're going to be building, let's say, Lethality Gnar, then maybe you get a one-shot with the full combo if you hit your ultimate on many of the squishy carries. But on the other hand, you're going to get a one-shot before you even get there, especially if you're versus an Aphelios or a Senna. or then maybe a Caitlyn as well. They just have such incredible range that there is no way that you're going to be able to reach them before already being killed, because they can just outrange you and they have so much damage. I do like these Jace buffs. Of course, Jace has been played. I think it was last year, maybe the year before that, in the by some of the Korean teams or Chinese teams, either of those. Well, his mana got increased and his mana growth got also increased. This is really nice. Of course, Jace is a champion that sometimes even has to build a tier in order to be able to keep up his constant poke and the res. And then also they buffed the damage on all ranks on his hammer form Q ability. Maybe this will make Jace a lot more viable. Of course, there's a lot of bruisers in the top lane, and Jace is very effective at poking them out, and there's a lot of ways to control the wave and make it and turn the lane into a very good state for him, so he can get prio quite often. He can also play safe under his turret if he knows that the enemy jungler is top lane. And he's a very strong early game champion, so that helps all the junglers that want to contest things in the early game and snowball their lead. So it might be nice to pick up Jace and try him out. The only downside of Jace is if you're versus an Aatrox and they have some Cloud Drakes, or if you're versus an Ornn, it's very hard to be able to deal with those kind of champions once they really get on you. Of course, you can knock them back as Jace, but in comparison with the other bruises that are viable in the top lane, Jace is not as tanky and can't survive the burst or damage that comes from any of the champions he's versing. So it's more of a maybe a flex pick or just a situational pick instead of him being top of the notch. Lux buffing support Lux. I mean, I don't think anybody is ever happy to see a support Lux being locked in their solo queue games. With Aftershock Athenes, it is nice. So they upped the base damage and they decreased the ratio, and they upped the they decreased the cooldown as well from her Q, and she can now flash while she's casting her R. Still don't think that Lux is going to be the best support to pick up if you want to have engage. You were better off picking Thresh or Nautilus. If you want to have shielding and stuff like that, you should pick a Nami, Lulu, Jenna. If you want to have a support that does damage with their ultimate, you can go for Zyra, you can go for Brand. There's just so much champions that can do everything that Lux can do, but then a lot better. And maybe if you need everything that Lux can offer in your team, in her kit, and you need it in your team, so you lack CC, you lack zoning potential with her E, you lack shield, you lack a long range ability, maybe then Lux is better to pick up. But I do think that she's more viable in the mid lane, just because you'll be building raw AP, and then people don't expect the damage that she can do with her combos or with her ultimate alone. So it makes her more viable than having her in the bot lane and just building an Athenes and an Arden to get the shield from her W to be increased. Rammus increases attack speed, it is attack speed ratio. It's quite nice. I mean, with Cinderhulk getting the buff, and then this increases the jungle clear that Rammus has. It's nice. It makes him slightly more viable, maybe into teams that are full AD or don't have like a Cassiopeia or a Ryze that can properly shred the Rammus. But on the other hand, it's the same as with playing Amumu jungle. There's no way that he can effectively contest these early game objectives. He needs items, he needs levels, he needs a team that's able to follow up, or if the enemy team has some really hard engage or a good lockdown composition, then it's hard for Rammus to actually get onto the backline and be effective with his W and ultimate. Singed, I mean, not even gonna talk about it. Don't think that Singed is viable. Of course, he was played together with Cassiopeia. I think it was, I don't know which team it was, but it was versus Set, and then the idea was that Singed and Cassiopeia both have grounding abilities, so if you use them on Set, he can't use his ultimate, but then why not pick a good team composition that can kite the set, or you just pick a lot of damage so you can burst him, you can pick a lot of mobility so you can play around him. There's so much better options to pick into set than Singed, and this will make him even less viable because he got nerfed. For Sona, there's this new, the mana restore ability. She gains 30 mana the first time she tags an ally with any of her basic abilities, and the mana cost on all the abilities is also increased at all ranks. As Riot says, I don't play her top anyways. Of course, we've seen the Soraka top lane, and now we're seeing parts of Sona top lane. This will just dissuade people from playing Sona top lane even more, and it will get people to play Sona in a support role probably a bit more, because now with the 30 mana gain every time you tag somebody, if you compare that with the increase in mana cost on their abilities, the cost is actually decreased if you get this new mana restore ability, if you can make good use of it. So by playing Sona in a dual lane, or doing a boosting strat where you're just following around the jungler and using your abilities to help the clear of your jungler, but then might as well just play your bot lane if you're gonna be support anyways. Soraka, they adjusted the base stats, so she does have more health, less health growth. They changed the mana growth, and the attack damage. The nice thing, of course, is the nerf on the Q. So she costs more mana, the heal is shorter, the heal is lower and doesn't scale as well with ability power, and her bonus movement speed is decreased. And then besides that, they also up the bonus on her W after rank 1. So this makes Soraka as a support more viable, because she doesn't have as much lane sustain, and she doesn't have as much like poke that she can do with the reduced self heal on the Q, and with her reduced health growth and mana growth. So she's gonna run out of resources sooner in the top lane, and she's more effective in the bot lane as a support, because they increased her heal at every single rank after the first one. It makes her less strong as a top laner. It makes her more susceptible to being killed in the 1v1, and she can't out-sustain enemy laners by poking them and then just healing all the damage that you can possibly do on her back with just a few Qs. But I don't think that it completely guts Soraka top lane. She's still quite potent, and it's still really hard to dive her with the Q slow and the silence that you can get rooted. But I do think it's necessary to change Soraka, and I really hope that this is enough to persuade people to play her bot lane, or maybe just not at all. Because I know it's not a fun champion to play against. Even if you buy healing reduction, that heal is still ridiculous if she has some items. And on Sylas, they increase the base damage on his Q after every rank. I think that's a really nice change. That might also make him viable, of course, in some matchups. I mean, if you're playing Sylas into Syndra, now of course Syndra's also the most aggressive and top tier mid lane bully that you can think of. But if you're playing Sylas into anything else, of course this is just gonna make him even more viable. You have a lot more wave clear, you have more poke with your Q. They didn't change any of his mana cost, it's only the damage, so this will just make him more viable as far as he was viable before. I do still think or know that you have to be quite adept on the champion if you wanna play him properly. On Udyr, he now gets a 5% cooldown reduction on his global. Udyr now gets 5% off his global cooldowns. The time between when he can switch stances per Cloud Drake buff. This is nice for Udyr players. I think Trick2G is gonna be really happy with this change. But the same thing as what I said with Garen and with Gnar, the champions that don't really have the gap closing ability or the strength that the current top lane or jungle bruisers have and able to properly compete with those champions in a spot in the top tier in the meta. So I don't it's nice for Udyr players, but I don't think that we're gonna be seeing a lot of Udyr. And Riot's new jungle changes. So Darius passive does more damage, his Q heals, Diana passive more damage, Garen E more damage, Gnar W more damage, Mordekaiser passive, Talon passive, Zed passive. They all do more damage to monsters. But the problem I have with Darius, Garen, Gnar, and Zed is that they're already not good picks to pick up either in the top lane or in the mid lane. So why would it be viable to pick them in the jungle? It's not like they're a hyper... I mean, Zed is scaling, of course, but the problem with most of these champions is that they're either lane bullies or they have very strong laning phases and power item spikes. But besides that, they're very easy to play around, and if you're playing at higher levels of play, in higher MMRs, or in competitive play where teams know what they're doing, it's so easy for them to just play around these cooldowns, buy a Zhonya's, kite you. Even if your jungle clear is going to be increased, there's still no reliable or proper way that you can get off your damage and that you can use maybe your farm or your item advantage that you have over the enemy jungler. And for a lot of these champions, there's just not a proper possibility to have effective ganks, to have an effective early game, to be incredibly useful in the late game. I don't see like a Darius taking Smite Ghost, because then you just invade him after your own jungler has reset, and then he might be low, you might have just caught him out, but then he's no flash, so it should be easy to kill, especially if you have some CC. On the other hand, Diana and Talon might be more useful. Diana's damage is now the same on... the passive damage is now the same as Echo's passive damage, is 150%. Of course, this is really nice for your clear. And Diana mid lane was already quite strong, but she still doesn't really have the early game capabilities to contest some of the objectives. Talon, on the other hand, does have this. So maybe Talon would be nice to pick up, especially if you're going to build a Tiamat and you have you can clear all the multi-monster camps very effectively. And of course you have quite nice ganks because you can jump over the walls and you can avoid most of the common vision that is placed down by supports or enemy teams. And Talon has a very strong early game, but still it seems very situational. I will just have to see how well this damage increase affects his jungle clear. And the thing with Diana, of course, as I said, the same passive damage percentage as Echo. Diana's more of a sustained, she's not really an assassin anymore. So in that situation, I would very much just prefer to have an Echo on my team. Echo scales really well. He has a free get out of jail card. With his ultimate, he can do a lot of damage on turrets. And his burst is just so much higher and better than Diana. Then they changed exhaust. The duration is longer and you can see how much damage is being reduced. I do like the duration buff. I always thought that exhaust was... way too slow. So I do think that people are gonna pick up exhaust a lot more, especially if people are gonna be trying out either Talon or Diana jungle. You're facing these sort of assassins that they can one-shot anybody on your team. If there's an Aatrox and you're really scared of him because you have no reliable way of keeping him at a distance or one-shotting him, then exhaust is gonna be a really nice pickup for your team. It was good to see not everybody taking Ignite anymore or TP. Hail of Blades, they want more people to use Hail of Blades, especially besides the junglers. I mean, the cooldown is increased, but as a jungler that's early, like Xin Zhao or Rek'Sai, you're not gonna be fighting every 4 seconds, or you're not gonna be having fought, then you're out of combat for 4 seconds, and then you're gonna start fighting again. That's not what these kind of junglers do, and of course, that's not what the enemy team wants to do, because as this early game jungler with this strong early game rune, you're gonna have won the fight. So then there's no chance that you're gonna be fighting again in 4 seconds if you're a smart team. And you've just lost a fight to an early game Rek'Sai or Xin Zhao, you're not going to be engaging on him again. You're not going to be counting seconds like, oh, his Hail of Blades is still on cooldown for 8 more seconds, for 4 more seconds, so we should go now. No, I don't think it changes anything. Also on the Legend runes, it takes 25 minions for a stack instead of 20, except for if you get kills. Right, it takes a little bit more time to scale up, but those were already, especially Bloodline and Alacrity for AD carries, of course, were especially scaling runes that you would take to get a lot more power in the late game. And the only thing that it does now is that this late game scaling, if you farm a lot, is delayed slightly. But with the current junglers and the importance of like Rift Heralds and getting Drake and Dragon, Rift Herald, River Control, don't think it's gonna matter that much, because there's still gonna be quite some kills happening in matches. And perfect timing, your stopwatch becomes available at 14 minutes, takedowns reduces by 2 minutes, no additional cooldown on GA, Gargoyles and Zhonya's, and the cost of the individual stopwatch is increased. I do expect that more people are gonna be taking the stopwatch just only because of this cost increase. Right, it's unfortunate that it no longer reduces the cooldown of the items that you can build with it, but I already thought that the cooldown on those items was already quite low. So it's unfortunate, but it's not a game-changing thing. And then, of course, 14 minutes, a lot of people are going to be complaining about this because it's way too long, but with the early game action and with the early game junglers, if your team manages to play around it properly, you can let prio, you can follow your jungler around, you're gonna get a few takedowns or assists, and you're gonna get this reduction. So then I don't see it mattering that much, and I still think that maybe even more champions or roles are gonna be picking up the perfect timing in their runes. In Phase Rush, they increase the time between attacks, and they increase the movement speed for melee champions. I don't know a lot of melee champions that want to run Phase Rush. I think this is better for range mages because they can kite better. If you're a melee, what are you going to do with Phase Rush? You're just going to run around them in circles faster, so not going to change a whole lot. I don't even know anybody that uses Omnistone, or if there's even a champion that can use it well. It's fun. I know it's fun to do because you can see whatever you want, and there was of course the Bard build where you take Omnistone and you go Deadman's Blade and Rapid Fire Cannon, but I've yet to see that in any competitive match, so this is not gonna change anything of that. And the bug fix to unflinching is of course really nice. But now we get to the most important part, and that is the new active, the new part of Bami Cinder, and also Cinderhulk and Sunfire Cape and Force Fire Cape. It's Imlet, so once every 10 seconds, your next immobilizing ability deals 6 to 23, 12 to 29, and 26 to 43, plus 0.2, 0.02, 0.04, 0.05 of your bonus health to all enemies it hits, and releases Fire Nova. Now that this Fire Nova is sort of a small infernal soul-like ability, but I do think that this is going to be really nice, of course, especially for Ornn players, because Ornn would already build a Sunfire Cape because he can upgrade it to a Forge Fire Cape. And as we've seen with the Amumu buff and maybe Gnar, and Gnar also got a jungle buff, and the Garen. Still don't think that, let's say what I said is that Gnar and Garen are going to be very viable in the jungle, but with these, with this new effect to the Bami Cinder items, it opens up possibilities to play tanks in the jungle or tanks in the top lane. Of course, what you do have to take into account that if you play a tank in the top lane or a tank in the jungle, that their early game power is going to be a lot lower than any of the bruisers that people like to play top lane, a lot of those bruisers have a very good level 3 ability power spike, and they work very well with the early items that they can get. Same of course goes for the junglers. Lee Sin is incredibly strong at level 3, Olaf is, Jarvan is, Elise is. They all have these very early item and level power spikes. So if you're gonna be playing a Cinderhulk jungler with an immobilizing ability, of course, otherwise you don't get the use of the effect, you're gonna have to give up some things in the early game. And then it's of course up to your team to be able to lose as little as possible as you can in the early games. Like maybe you can give up the first Drake, and if you have to, the first Rift Herald, but just you have to make sure that you don't feed too much kills or too much resources to the enemy, because of course they can just snowball out of control, and then it doesn't really matter if you have this nice new effect on your Bami Cinder or your Cinderhulk or Sunfire Cape, because you're just way too far behind. But I do think that it's a very big buff, and it does make champions that either top lane or in the jungle or mid lane, wherever you want to play them, more viable, also competitively. And what I do like is that it gives the option for a more diverse champion pool in all the other lanes. So if you have a true tank in the top lane, you can play healing or ardent AD support, because you don't need your support to be Leona or Thresh or Nautilus, and build a Gargoyle Stoneplate and be the tank that your team lacks in the jungle or in the top lane role. So you can go Nami, and you can use all these support champions because there's someone else in your team that is a tank that can face tank all the damage, that can engage for you. And also with tanks becoming more viable with this new effect, it might also make AD carries more viable, because of course the AD carry pool nowadays, especially Senna Aphelios, I mean, I haven't even seen a lot of Senna in recent days. And then Miss Fortune, I mean, you pick Xayah with Rakan because it's a very strong lane combo and Xayah has her own peel, or you pick Varus. But maybe this will open up possibilities where AD carries become slightly more viable. I do think that it's mostly then aimed at champions or AD carries that can build a Bladed Ruined King. So that's Varus, maybe Vayne if the enemy team doesn't have a lot of range. Lucian, of course, is going to be a very good pickup because he can build Bladed Ruined King, and he has a lot of early game strength to assist his jungler. So then you can snowball, and you have a consistent and proper way of dealing with these tanks that you might be seeing now. And the reason for it being Bladed Ruined King instead of crit AD carries like Caitlyn or Jhin is because the damage that Immolate on those the Immolate is the effect. The damage that Immolate does scales with bonus health, and then especially on Sunfire Cape. And crit items just still take a very long time to scale, and if you're versus an Ornn that has a Sunfire Cape and a Deadman's Blade, he's not only gonna have a lot of HP, but he's also gonna be having a lot of resistances. So then you need your 3 crit items in order to effectively use the critical strike chance that you have and the damage that it can provide. But you're also gonna be needing to build some armor penetration in order to deal with the amount of armor that he has. So that just even further delays the power spike that critical strike using champions have, and that might open up the way for champions that can build a Bladed Ruined King. Of course, as I've said before, that I think that Miss Fortune and especially Aphelios are still going to be the strongest champions, but that's mostly due to the range that they can have on their abilities. And Miss Fortune, of course, make a really good use out of building a lot of AD in the early game. She's very strong, and Aphelios with his different guns can fit into so many different scenarios. But I do hope that with this Bami Cinder buff, that we'll be seeing some tanks in some different lanes, or just off tanks that they opt into Sunfire Cape instead of a Deadman's Blade, or if you're playing a Mumu jungle, that you still build Liandry's, Because if people are going to be playing more of those tanks, then you can play different champions in the support role, and you can play different champions in the AD carry role. So it just diversifies the champion pool that is viable in the competitive meta, and I think that's a nice thing to see. It gives a lot more options in draft. You don't get the Azir Corki meta where you see those champions facing each other off all the time, or like we've seen especially in the beginning of this season, where it's just Senna versus the Aphelios every single game. So I'm happy about it. I think it's nice. And I can't wait to see what this actually does in game, and what it means for champions, and what it means for the viability of other champions. Because of course, a change as big as this will impact every single role in the game. But thank you very much for listening, and I will hope to see you at the patch 10.5 review in a few days. Thank you. See ya.